Story 1. Took the check of $113 straight to mom. I was 14 and we needed groceries. I was a bit salty about it back then, but now that she's passed, I'd give her my full paychecks from my current job if I could. Story 2. After getting my post-college salary job, I spent my first paycheck taking my whole family to dinner at a nice restaurant. They all ordered prime rib and lobster. I had to pay on my credit card since the bill was higher than my paycheck. Story 3. Food. My dad had a serious heart condition and couldn't work. My mom was dead, my older siblings had moved out long before, and my youngest sibling was only 10 to 11 years old. We had been living pretty meagerly. I loaded up the fridge and cupboards. Both my tummy and self-esteem were feeling good. Story 4. I saved up my first 2 or so paychecks and bought my first mobile phone. I can't quite remember how much it cost or how much I made. I was 13 at the time. I couldn't afford any of the fancy ones. Everyone else had a Nokia 3210 or whichever Ericsson was popular at the time, but I ended up buying a Sagem brand that no one had ever heard of. Story 5. In 1990, I had just moved from Ireland to London for my first real job after college. My first paycheck seemed like so much money. I felt rich. I bought myself a beautiful leather jacket in the Trocadero Center in Piccadilly Circus. I loved that jacket and had it for years until I lost it while moving from New York to Texas. I was so devastated. Story 6. A Sony PSP. Had my eye on it for months, so I got a job between sophomore and junior year of high school. At the time, minimum wage was $6.25 per hour, but I found a job that paid $8.25 per hour to start. Worked 2 full 40-hour weeks, and I got a check that was enough to cover the purchase. Loved that thing. Story 7. Wasn't my first paycheck, as it took the first bunch of paychecks to cover it. Working 12 to 16 hours per week at $5.25 per hour in high school, but after about 10 weeks of working, I blew the whole thing on a PlayStation 1, an extra controller, Area 51 plus a light gun. The total was right around $500, and I felt sick after spending it. Story 8. It wasn't my first paycheck, but a collection of them. I was around 14 or 15 and had a summer job with one thing in mind at the end of it. A lava lamp. I loved that lamp so much. I'm a data scientist now and always think about how many lamps I could buy at any given moment, and it makes me happy to know how far I've come. I might go buy one just as a reminder. Story 9. I took my young brother to our local amusement park. I remember saying to him, "I've got $20, let's go." I'll never forget that feeling. It felt like $1 million. He is estranged from me now, but in my heart, I know he must think of those soft summer days we spent together. Story 10. The first paycheck I received was for doing a few weeks of manual labor at a home renovation. I was 16 right before my senior year. I bought my mother Dolce & Gabbana glasses as a thank you. I also bought my brother's back-to-school gear, which included clothes and shoes. I had about $50 to $60 left, so I got myself a pair of pants and slip-on shoes from the outlet outside of Vegas. I think my check was just a bit over $400. Story 11. I bought my brother a bunch of new clothes. He's one of those guys that never buys new clothes and still wears old clothes he had from high school. As weird as he is, I still love him very much, and he also helped me get the job from which I acquired my first paycheck, so I guess I owe him that as well. Story 12. I remember specifically wanting this computer game and asking my mom for it. She said, "Get a job." So I did, and with my first paycheck, I bought this game. Story 13. In the late 1980s, I was 16. First summer job. First paycheck. I bought a camera and a fedora-style outdoor hat. The rest went into my savings. The camera served me well for 5 to 6 years, and I still have the hat. It's beaten up but still functional, and it still fits, unlike any other clothes from that time. Story 14. I went straight to snacks. I recall my first job at a very young age was driving a pedal ice cream cart. Not Dickie D, but a local competitor that was yellow and had a high sign. It was a sail in high winds. Not terribly fun when windy. Anyway, it was nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit out, and I have a problem with frozen treats to this day. They had orange creamsicles. I couldn't resist having more than one, even though I'd be paying for them. My employer was perfectly okay with it since it was being paid for either way. It was actually fantastic driving it through my own neighborhood. Lots of people knew me and everyone bought. I'd be stuck in place for 5 to 10 minutes. A community, private village, if you will, of townhouses and young families. Story 15. I was 15 and had never received $200 to $300 instantly like that, so I didn't know what to do and just started buying stuff. The first planned purchase with my check was an iPod. Story 16. I got a job near the end of high school at McDonald's. The first thing I did was buy a cell phone. We live in poverty, so I never had a cell phone, while literally every other person did. Story 17. First paycheck? I was 15, so maybe 1996 or so. The check was only about $300, paid bi-weekly. I bought the expansion for Warcraft 2 for my brother and me. And weed. Story 18. I bought a game console that I had been saving up for forever. Felt amazing to finally get it with my own money. I spent the whole weekend playing and felt like a champion. Story 19. An old-style label maker that punches the letters into the plastic. I got it just for fun and labeled everything. Even things like the light switch in my room, the door handle on the door, and the dashboard in my friend's car. It was fun to have money to just blow. Oh, to be 16 again. Story 20. A 12-pound pumpkin mug from Anthropology. It is still one of my favorite mugs, and I've never spent so much money on one before, so I wanted to treat myself. Story 21. My story is boring and paid my rent, but two of my other friends who started their jobs at the same time had much better stories. Friend 1 went to the bank, cashed his check, had the teller count it out and put it in his hand, and told the teller that he had never held that much money in his life. He then opened a checking account and deposited it. Friend 2 went and bought new skis, boots, and poles, and then had to borrow money from me and friend 1 to have enough to pay his rent and make it through the first month. Story 22. I honestly don't remember. I was abroad and trying to start my life with my now wife. She was still learning English back then. I do remember what she did with hers. She bought me an Xbox One. We now came back to our country and finished university. I still keep that console. Story 23. Bought my mom jewelry when I was 15. She still has it. She showed it to me not too long ago. It's cheap and cheesy, but hey, I was 15 and working a part-time fast food job. Story 24. My first job was as a closer at Einstein Bagels. I did the dishes and took out the garbage after school. I can confirm that with my first paycheck, I bought a sizable amount of weed and got intensely high. Story 25. I bought a set of high-quality headphones. I had been using cheap ones forever, and finally getting a good pair felt like a game changer for my music and podcasts. Story 26. I picked up a bill my mom could not pay, so she was pushing it off to the next month with late fees. I paid it in full, knowing I would not feel it since I was not used to having the money. Then the rest was beer money. Story 27. Fresh out of college in 2005, I swore that when I got my first job in my chosen field, I would spend my first paycheck on the Ultimate Matrix collection, the huge 10 DVD box set of the Matrix trilogy, the Animatrix, and more bonus features than you can shake a stick at. It took me a year to find a job in my chosen field, but I held myself to that promise. Story 28. Textbooks. I had to think back on it, but my first job didn't pay much, and it all went into the bank since I was living with my parents. By the time I had my first 1,000, that's what it was needed for. Story 29. Not so much my first ever paycheck because I didn't have a driver's license yet. But when I got mine, the first thing I did was drive to a music shop and buy a guitar with the money I had saved from those paychecks. Story 30. Gas, probably. My first job in high school was as a golf caddy, so there were no official paychecks from that. However, I was generally responsible for filling up my car, and my mom paid for the insurance. My first paycheck job was as a range picker at a local golf course. I worked around 10 hours a week at $5 or whatever the minimum wage was at the time. After taxes, it didn't give me much apart from gas money. Story 31. I don't remember a distinct first thing that I bought. By the time I had my first paycheck, I was out of college and living on my own, so I had to pay for everything. Story 32. My family has a tradition where, with our first paycheck as teenagers, we would take our parents out to dinner. Nowhere fancy or expensive, but just as a way to express gratitude. Story 33. Nothing, it went right into my first checking account that I opened with it. A couple of years later, the account paid for a trip to Europe for 6 months. Story 34. I placed a Wayne Gretzky rookie card on layaway. The card was a total of $250. I made payments in $50 increments. Took the entire summer to pay it off. This happened in 1990. Story 35. I bought a bunch of fishing lures. I was a lifeguard at around 15 or 16 years old and got paid a lot more than all of my friends at the time because the minimum wage in Florida at the time was around $7, maybe. I don't really remember, and $15 an hour was god-tier money for me, so I needed to flex on all my fishing buddies. Story 36. I was a truck helper, hauling books and binders. I bought a lovely Panasonic RX 4940 boombox radio in 1983. I still have the radio in my garage, and other than the cassette tape player, it still works. Story 37. I did not. I got pickpocket at the carnival. My first ever job was a cash-in-hand fruit picking job. It was backbreaking, but it was money. The first envelope I get, I take my girlfriend at the time to the traveling carnival that was in town for a few weeks. Walking around, go to pay for something, and boom, no wallet. All my cards, cash, and the condom I was planning to use that night, gone. About 3 years later, the police phone me up and say my driving license has been found on some carnival worker about 300 miles away from my town. And would I like it back? I politely tell them to cut it up. I have a new one now. Alas, he did not have my wallet or my cash. Story 38. I bought a Super Nintendo. I got a job delivering newspapers on my bicycle so I could buy it. My parents thought I would waste my money on candy or other things, but I saved every penny from my first several paychecks and then bought that Super Nintendo. Story 39. Nothing. I lived in a small hick town, so there wasn't really anywhere to buy cool stuff. A year later, the teller at the bank suggested I park the money in a mutual fund if I didn't need it anytime soon, and I couldn't figure out how to take the money out and never stopped the automatic withdrawals, so there it stayed until I was in my early 20s and closed out the account. With subsequent paychecks, books, and iced cappuccinos. I was huge into young adult fiction as a high schooler. Story 40. I bought Halo for the original Xbox back in 2006 or so, but I didn't own an Xbox at the time. I ended up buying an original Xbox shortly after but was desperately trying to boot the game on my PlayStation in the meantime. Story 41. A Super Nintendo with Super Mario World. It was 2005, and I had been a Genesis kid and wanted to make up for lost time. No regrets. Well, maybe I regret not picking up some other titles when they were like $20 to $30 and not hundreds of dollars like they are today. Story 42. I signed up for the Columbia House subscription, which only cost a few cents on the first order. Then came the next cassette and the next and the next, and they were like $12 a piece. Story 43. Phone cards to call my girlfriend long distance. It was my second semester of college, and I finally got a job on campus that paid decently. She broke up with me not long after that, though, because of the distance. That was almost 25 years ago. These days, phone cards aren't much of a thing anymore unless you're incarcerated. Story 44. I got a weekend job in high school back in 1999 at a grocery store as a shelf stacker. I bought a CD with some of my first pay, Weird Al Yankovic Running with Scissors. Story 45. I bought my friend a better quality prong collar because she was using a nearly 10-year-old poor quality one, and it pained me a little to see it on her dog. Story 46. I bought a TV from Sears. It was a clearance model since they used it in the break room, but the guys at the loading dock gave me a new one since they were too lazy to pack up the used one. I saw the look on the manager's face just as I was pulling around the corner, and it was priceless. Story 47. My first paycheck was when I was 16 years old from McDonald's, so probably McDonald's. But my first career job paycheck went to a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan Scotch that I have once every year on the anniversary of buying it. I have one last year before it's done. Story 48. I was 15 years old, worked all day Saturday in a hair salon, and I earned £7 in 1988. I blew it all on some Body Shop peppermint foot lotion and a small bottle of shampoo on the way home. Just like that, 7 hours of earnings were gone in a moment. Story 49. Not paycheck, but royalty check. In today's money, about $80,000 and quarterly, but taxed at 50%. 5 of us walked into a motorcycle dealership and all walked out with brand new bikes, leathers, gloves, and helmets. Mine was a CBR 600 F3, paid in cash. Probably their best month ever. Story 50. I bought a watch. I like watches. Everyone I know had one, and I did too. But I never had my own watch that I got for myself. I still wear it daily, and it's one of the best purchases I have made. Story 51. I was 16, now 39, when I bought Max Payne for PlayStation 2, a 24-pack of Mountain Dew, and snacks, because I was locked in for the weekend. I had it off, I remember, but I beat the game by Saturday morning. So, I went out with friends to see a movie later that night after sleeping. I remember my dad telling me, "If you want Nintendo stuff, get a job. You're old enough to." Of course, he got mad when I did start to work and would spend my money on PlayStation products. So, he started with his "the electricity isn't free in my house" complaints. Before edit. Max Payne is a classic, along with Part 3, but looking back, I should have rented it because I beat it so fast. Ironically, later that year, Grand Theft Auto 3 was released. I remember renting that and racking up late fees until I bought it. Story 52. I saved up and bought a Sony LBT D107, our bookshelf stereo. It had a 5-disc changer that could even program to perfectly fill each side of a cassette. I missed that thing.